Right, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. I think we've got some good numbers. So this is the first of our In Conversation series for this academic year, today with Professor Mark N.K. Saunders. And quite fortunate, really, because it also begins Academic Writing Month across the university. So just to let you know as well, we've got Michelle Mitchell on our, Michelle as tutor two on our call today, who'll be helping me with questions at the end and any queries during the session. So I'd just like to introduce Mark. So Mark Saunders is Professor of Business Research Methods at the Business School. He currently holds visiting professorships at the Universities of Pretoria, Gordon Institute of Business, South Africa, Mladeland, Sweden, Surrey and Worcester. He was awarded a fellowship of the Academy of Social Sciences in recognition of his contribution to methods and human resource management research and social science research and development. Mark is also a fellow of the First International Network on Trust and the British Academy of Management. He has been awarded the British Academy of Management's medals for knowledge development for his outstanding devotion to knowledge development in the field of research methods, and for leadership in recognition of prolonged contribution to doctoral capacity building. His textbook, Research Methods for Business Students, currently in its 9th edition, was ranked the most influential business and economics textbook in the world by the Financial Times Teaching Power League table. Mark's research interests include research methods, human resource aspects of the management of change, in particular trust, and small and medium-sized enterprise, SME, success. He also enjoys researching pedagogic practice, writing textbooks, and teaching and supervising doctoral students. Mark has co-authored and edited over 30 books, including How to Keep Your Doctorate on Track, Insights from Supervisors and Students' Experiences. He has published over 150 research articles and book chapters, including papers in journals such as British Journal of Management, Field Methods, Human Relations, Human Resource Management Journal, International Small Business Journal, and Journal of Small Business Management. Tourism, his work being cited in excess 93,000 times. He is Associate Editor, Methodology for Human Resource Management Journal, Consulting Editor for the International Journal of Management Reviews, Europe Editor for the Services Industries Journal, and on the editorial boards of the European Journal of Management, Personnel Review, and the Journal of Trust Research. So a very warm welcome, Mark, today. It's a very heavy biography there. So thank you very much for joining us. We're keen to learn from your experience. So I'd like to begin by asking, when you began your academic career, did it take some time for you to establish your academic voice in your writing?
It's a great question to start off with, Matt. The honest answer is I think I still am. I think writing under one's academic voice comes with practice, and I know I am way, way, way better at writing now than I was 5 years ago. And I'm certainly streets better. I look at the stuff I was writing when I started my academic career and I cringe at it now. So I think it's something we improve with by doing, and it takes a lot of time. The thing I found is, though, that it's about doing it. It's not about talking about writing. You actually have to do it to get better. And you have to work with people who love you enough to tell you when it's not good enough. I mean, I think one of the things I've always remembered is was being told very early on, if somebody tells you your work is absolutely fine, it means they probably haven't bothered to read it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, like you say, having those honest insights from people that you trust, and a variety of people as well. But it's also quite humbling to learn that, with all your years of experience and practice, that you're still learning, and it's all about self-betterment. And I think that idea as well of writing little and often, and sort of keeping the thought processes flowing, it's very interesting indeed. So PGRs are taught that establishing where and when in the day they write best is key. So in consideration of the many commitments of your working week, when and where do you write best?
Well, at the moment I write very well on the kitchen table,
Right.
which is where I'm sitting at the moment. I've found, though, there are certain times of the day are really good for me for writing. So I get up early and I will write for 2 to 3 hours before breakfast. And that seems to work well for me. Then the midway through the day to the mid-afternoon is complete and utterly dead loss of time. So you might as well do something else. And then
Okay.
it starts again in the early evening. And then and having said that, you get some days where you actually the writing seems to work and you just go flat out. I was working this morning on something. I looked at my watch and thought, my gosh, it's 11 o'clock and I haven't had breakfast yet. And I've been going since 6. And yet other days you get about 5 words down. You think, I just can't do it. So
Yeah,
the other thing I have found though, which is I really love trained for writing on. They're brilliant, especially for editing, because nobody can interrupt you. And you just
okay,
say,
yeah,
get on with it.
that's really interesting. Like you say, where to write? Is it like in the home? Is it the library? Is it the train? Just having that sort of, I suppose, like variety of places that you know are sort of key for concentration. But it's interesting as well because particularly, I mean, you know, established researchers and also postgraduates on the call know that, you know, we're sort of working to different timescales, and some of us are part-time students as well. Um, so it's interesting to know that there's not sort of one set time in the day that's best. It's good actually as well to mix it up. And if you find that you're sort of on a roll writing, to sort of stick with that. So I suppose sort of being flexible and open-minded about the process seems to be the key takeaway there. So would you say that you're a serialistic writer? So do you plan first and then write, um, sort of in sequence, or are you a holistic planner? Do you write as you think, creating a succession of drafts, or are
I'm
you
going to give.
somewhere in between, do you think?
I think, Matt, I'll give you the typical researcher's answer. It depends.
Hmm.
But so I've thought about this question because Matt very kindly folks sent me the questions beforehand so I could think. And it depends on what I'm writing, because if I'm writing a paper on my own, or I'm lead author, I will probably spend a lot of time planning that paper before I actually start to actually write it as a paper.
Hmm.
And so that would suggest I was a planner, making lots of notes and then going into writing. Although at the moment, quite a lot of the work I'm doing is rewriting. And so that's the planning of that is very different. I'm rewriting one of my textbooks at the moment, and I've spent the last 3 years as I've read stuff, I've just made notes in the book of new materials to actually put into it. So then when I come to do it, it's just a case of picking up the book and going for it, and then editing straight away and editing the new parts in. So it's a very different approach. The other thing I have to do sometimes is if it's a topic I get completely utterly stuck on how to write, I just do free writing. So I would just sit and write it in rubbish language and then go and edit it after. I can see Jaice's nodding very favourably at that idea. So it depends on it. It depends on what I'm doing. I've tried always, but I think my favourite one is to spend a lot of time reading, making notes, and then order the notes around to get it in its general structure that seems to work, and then start to write it and find it doesn't, so reorder it. But I don't write, I rewrite.
Hmm. That's brilliant. Yeah, like you say, sort of that rewriting process and sort of
Yeah.
revising current works and sort of chipping away at it. I mean, it's interesting you talk about free writing because that runs into the next question. But it's quite interesting to know, you know, in terms of defining yourself as a writer, that you can be some kind of hybridized writer in that sense. You don't have to be one thing or the other. And I suppose as well, you might change with age and experience. So it's kind of nice that you sort of take something of being a serialistic writer and also something of being a holistic planner as well. So that's very interesting. So that feeds into my second question. So evidently you are a fan of free writing. Can you just sort of share any sort of top tips for free writing?
Yeah.
Sort of, is there a specific time to allow for it, or is it just sort of when it takes your sort of when the mind is twigged, as it were?
For me, free writing is I normally use it when I get stuck, and I just put something down to get it going again rather than using it often. I tend to be much more of a planner than a free writer. Free writing I also find really helpful if there's something I'm finding very complex, to try and get my head around it before I turn it into academic stuff. So I write it in English, which I can understand, and then I turn it into academic speak, which is very different so often.
Mhm.
I can see
I
it's a
always
different.
question this every day, but like the 22
Sorry, if we
shifts
could
is
just
never
keep
done.
muted there, I think.
Like
Sorry about
That's
that.
quite all right. Zoom.
It is, yeah, the nature of Zoom. Very interesting indeed, though. Like you say, that free writing useful as a tool get you out of certain holes, certain traps, and that
Mm.
sort of sense of converting the language as well,
Mm.
into that more refined academic language later on. That's very interesting because I think, I mean, in my limited experience, working with other researchers in the research skills team in the library, I think people think that sort of the writing has to be top notch, from the get go. But it's so important, isn't it, to learn that it's almost necessary for it to be in that crude form before it
Yeah.
gets better. That it is part of a process, and we're not expecting great things immediately. So
I
that's
mean,
mm,
it's the finished piece that people look at, not all the drafts along the way. I
yes.
I once kept a track of how many drafts I did on a paper, and I called drafts. When Word gives it a new count, I
Hmm.
called that a new draft, and I think I got up to about 75 drafts on one paper.
All
Just because,
right.
but I think it is about rewriting, and I think that's the crucial thing. It's not writing well first time. It's rewriting and polishing the whole time. And there are certain parts of papers when you get stuck, or books, chapters, and then you have to perhaps leave them and come back to them later, but just make some notes of what you think goes in there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sort of reminds me of a word that I've come across in my own research. This idea of a palimpsest, sort of writing and then fixing something and writing a bit more and changing the shape of it. That's very interesting indeed. So nowadays, many doctoral students use technology and different apps to aid their writing productivity. So do you yourself use any of these, or do you favour a more manual approach?
I use this amazing app called Word,
Mm.
piece of software, which is, I mean, it's fantastic, and there's no doubt about it. But I actually favour one of these things quite a lot. It's called a pen.
Yes, yeah,
And I
absolutely.
find I find that it's really helpful to be able to see everything with a piece of paper and flick it backwards and forwards. So I tend to work, once I've got something, I tend to have printed versions and edit them by hand and then type it in and do a bit of online editing and back and forth. So it's very much a hybridized paper pen. I wish I'd started using referencing software, which I didn't, and I'm really annoyed I didn't. But I discovered this week that if you put your text of references into ChatGTP and say turn it into Harvard format or something, it does it very well for you. And that was
All
probably
right.
my biggest discovery this week.
Right. Oh, that's very
So
interesting
I'm,
indeed.
I've been playing quite a lot with Gen AI recently just to see how it does things, and some things it does well, some things it scares me because I don't know how it's got there and it doesn't make
Hmm.
sense. But it's certainly incredibly good at putting references in the right format.
Mm. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we'll come on to a few of those bits later on, as you know. But that is interesting. Again, that kind of hybridized way of working and
Mm.
methods that are sort of tried and true, like Microsoft Word and all its tools.
Mm.
Like I say, it's good to know that there is some kind of constant in the world, despite the fact that there are other apps and
Yeah.
productivity tools to go alongside. So, but that's really interesting as well.
I mean, on other
Mm,
productivity tools, I love spell checks, but only at the end. I don't
okay.
worry about spelling as I go through it. And I mean, the grammar check I disagree with.
Hmm.
And I think we have to be very careful with these because otherwise we're all going to turn into Americans in terms of
Right.
right, because it's where the software comes from, and we have to, and it doesn't match some journals as well. So we have to think very carefully.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, isn't it? The way a lot of these softwares they sort of default to those certain American spellings, and just
Yeah.
being sort of aware of that. Yeah,
I
that
mean,
isn't it.
I've lost count of the number of times I've had journal articles back from reviewers which say it would be helpful if this was written by a native English speaker.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's like something to be sort
So
of
don't
cautious
worry,
of.
folks, it happens to us all.
No, but again, it's good to know, like I say, from yourself, that these little challenges that we need to sort of overcome. Just be aware of certain
Mm.
those flags like that. Yeah, that's very interesting. Um, I mean, this feeds in actually to my next question. So, saying that despite the technology that we have nowadays, you were saying that it is nice to make notes by hand. And I actually agree with that. I often
Mm.
carry a journal sort of with me, with the understanding that I would digitize it later, so that I don't,
Mm.
there's no risk of losing it completely. But could you tell us just a bit more about your handwriting, as it were?
I think it starts off with, I mean, when I'm reading, I tend to make notes, and I tend to
Mhm.
make notes by hand, which is very old fashioned, but it works. I mean, I tend to make I make two sorts of notes. I make notes about method, not surprisingly, and notes about substantive content, and I'm sort of keeping two sets of notes running at the same time. And then I'm always, I'm always very scared stiff of being done self plagiarizing. So I always make a note if I've directly quoted from somebody. And what I
Mhm.
tend to do with the notes is I used to actually to get pieces of paper and scissors and cut them up and move them around until I could actually make it into a structure. But now I tend to actually type it up because that helps me think about it a bit more. And then I actually electronically move things around to create a structure to get the text in the right order for the argument I'm trying to take
Yes. Yeah.
and build the argument up. And I suppose the first draft on that, if I can get 1,000 words done in a day, which I look at and think are okay, I'm happy, and I'll probably rewrite them the next day. So it's very
Yeah.
much a rewrite, and then do it. I tend now to try and have an overall structure and see where I'm going to put things as I'm writing, but if it doesn't work, I change it. And
Yeah.
quite often where I start with the structure doesn't work, and it's just somehow appears by magic.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was leading a session yesterday for library skills, and we were talking about, much like you had said there, trying to think of that initial structure, the skeleton of the piece, but
Mm,
with the understanding that it will change and sort of going back to those initial
mm,
guiding principles. And I think it's that idea, isn't it, of not fearing change as well. I think people think they have to
yeah.
get it down pat initially, and then that's it. But
I've, I've been doing quite a lot of work with students recently on the idea of having a golden thread running through in your argument, so you can actually see it, and so it all does fit together, and that's been quite helpful to try and visualize it as a thread running through, so you can actually or see it as a journey through the paper or chapter you're writing, and
that's
so all the
fantastic.
parts link together.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a brilliant sort of image as well. Like you said, the golden thread going all the way through. And just going back to what you were saying there about um, handwriting, it's nice, like you say, when you're on the go or when an idea hits you, if you're not at the
Mm,
computer, just to make those notes, but also in your work to have that kind of, I suppose, like an assemblage, a cut and paste approach,
mm.
and move things around. And I know there are apps to do that interactively now as well. So
It doesn't
that's
work as well, Matt, as having a bit of floor and a bit and paper which you can move around and stick it in different places with a bit of sellotape and keep on
yeah.
moving it around until it looks right. I stress you
Mm.
need sellotape because if somebody opens the door and the wind comes, it rather messes up the structure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be that would be certainly would be soul destroying. Yeah, so it's yeah, very interesting indeed, and it's nice to know that we all work differently, and like we were saying, some of these
Mm.
manual approaches still have their place in a technology heavy world. That is really interesting. Um, so nowadays, well, there are pressures to achieve a certain standard of
Mm.
writing as a postgraduate, which can engender that much quoted feeling of imposter syndrome. Have you ever suffered from this? And what are your techniques for assuaging this feeling? And does it truly ever go away?
I'll start at the end. No, it doesn't. It's there the whole time. I'll guarantee that. And I think Birmingham University's designed a thing to actually make sure everybody feels imposter syndrome called the etchings on the Learning Centre as you work down from the railway station. You've got the
Hmm.
names of all those Nobel Prize winners. And I just look at it and think, how the heck did I get a job here? And so the university is very good at doing that for us. But being more serious, I don't think imposter syndrome ever goes away because I think we never compare ourselves with people who are like us. We always compare ourselves with people who are better. I think things like Facebook, etc., and LinkedIn, where people are actually saying, "Hey, look, I've just had this new paper published," doesn't help either because nobody ever says, "Hey, I've just had my 15th paper rejected this week," do they?
Hmm.
So all that starts to make you feel less good,
Yes. Yeah.
and it doesn't ever go away. You just sort of learn to cope with it.
Hmm.
Because when you start talking when you start talking to people, you realize everybody feels like that, and you realize that loads of people are getting rejections the whole time, and then it starts to become much more of a norm.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very interesting. You were saying exactly what I was thinking, actually, the idea of social media and sort of,
Mm.
instead of working for yourself, that sort of comparing yourself to each other and sort of everything being magnified. but like you say, so important to consider your own efforts. And it's suppose it's that idea, really, isn't it, of self-satisfaction.
I don't think, Matt, that the this whole preoccupation with getting into top journals, however they're defined, helps either. And
Yes.
because there seems to be, people seem to be writing to hit a journal rather than writing to get an idea out and read by people, which is surely what you should really do. And we've got some exciting stuff we found out. Let's talk to people about it, or let's write about it. And then the good journals look after themselves.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I think if time allows, and I think it will actually, we might talk a little bit more about the publication process, because I know when I interviewed Ellis Griffiths in Modern Languages last year, people were quite interested to hear his views on that. So I think we've partly touched on this. Do you, or have you ever suffered from writer's block? And do you have any specific techniques for remedying that?
I've suffered from writer's blocks on bits of things I'm writing rather than the whole thing. I can remember I was writing the concluding chapter of a book on organizational trust, and I just could not get in my head how to do it. So I rang up a friend and I just said, "Hey, I'm writing this and I'm stuck. Can you ask me some awkward questions and talk it through with me?" And we just literally talked about it, and within about 15 minutes, I had a structure which I could use. So I think talking to other people helps, and so that then links into more generally, if you're writer's block, if you're working with somebody else on a paper or a book chapter or a book, then when they get stuck, you probably aren't, and vice versa. So that tends to help working with other people greatly. I do have some friends who just sit at a computer and refuse to get off the computer so they've done at least 1,000 words and they can type whatever they want in. That doesn't work for me. Sometimes I just get up and go for a walk and then come back, and it seems to do that. I find going for a walk and just thinking about what you're trying to do helps as well without having a screen or anything.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Like you say, it's so important to avoid that kind of self-punishment and to give yourself time and take breaks. And I suppose to understand that, it's sort of an organic process and you can't force it really. But I also like the point you make about not being afraid to ask for help. I think, again, I mean, talking about the postgraduate community, I think some people get a bit sort of, I don't know what the word is, that they're afraid to sort of, in case it sort of communicates some kind of vulnerability or something, but it's not at all. It's an idea of shared practice. So that anecdote you mentioned there about that phone conversation, it's very interesting indeed, and I mean it's a lesson for life, really, isn't it? So that is very interesting.
I think the other thing that links to that, Matt, is that when I've written something, it never sees the light of a journal or gets sent to a conference without somebody else having read it first and commented on it. I don't like sending my work out without having somebody independent looking at it. And it depends on what I'm doing as to who's reading it. So at the moment, I'm working on a textbook. And so my son gets to read that because he will read it from the viewpoint of a student. And so I try and get the person to read it who's links into the intended audience a bit as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, like I say, getting somebody to read it from different perspectives, or even I suppose when you're reading your own work back, trying to consider it from a given perspective. Well, that feeds nicely actually into my next question, which I think you've partly answered anyway. So I originally said, do you get colleagues, friends, and family to give you feedback on your written work? But do you prefer to be your sort of? Are there times where are you your own critic, or do you always have that kind of
I get your point, Matt. I tend to start off with, I read it to myself and I read it out loud to myself. And if I ran out of breath and I've obviously got the punctuation wrong or the sentences are too long. So that's my, and I try not to give it to anybody till I'm happy with it. Because there's otherwise I'm wasting their time and I won't get, and if I know what's wrong with it, then I ought to have fixed it. So the book I'm working at the moment, I said my son gets it because he can get close to being what an undergraduate would look like. And then because it's a methods one, I can send it to an expert in methods to read as well. So I get both sets of feedback with it to make sure I'm not missing anything up.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. And it sort of reminds me of the fact nowadays that as postgraduates, we're thinking about how to disseminate rather research to non-specialists as well as specialists in certain cases. So sometimes seeing if a non-specialist can follow certain argument, I think is quite interesting if that test works. And like you say, having family members read it from a certain level, I think sounds very interesting. But then you were talking about your colleague there, like absolutely getting that peer
Yeah.
feedback
And then
is
if
so
you go
important.
to journal articles, like that will definitely be read by 4 or 5 different people before it gets submitted to a journal. And
Mhm.
I mean, it then means you have to do it back for 4 or 5 people, but I much prefer my colleagues to tell me where I've got it wrong than to have it go to a journal and be told it's a desk reject
Yes,
or
yeah,
something like that.
absolutely.
So it tends to help a great deal. And obviously, if you're writing jointly with people, you're reading each other's parts of it anyway, which again tends to move
Mhm.
it up. But when we're jointly working together, again, it goes to somebody who isn't part of it, because then we know that because otherwise you get this group think of saying, "Oh, isn't this a wonderful paper?" when in fact it isn't.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I suppose, like you say, there's the confidence in knowing. I mean, I suppose it's quite daunting initially, but there is that confidence in the sense that you know that several people are going to read it before it gets to
Mm.
that stage of publication, that you've got those different pairs of eyes
We
on the
certainly do that
work.
with the doctoral students, Matt. I mean, my own doctoral students, if they're writing something, then I expect to read it for them.
Mm.
It's not about expecting to be an author on it; it's expecting to read it on it. It's part of the role of being a supervisor to enable them to write better.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say,
Mm.
it being a crucial element of the role. Absolutely. So when you get to an established stage in your academic career, so
Mm.
writing monographs, for example,
Mm.
do anxieties about writing ever truly go away?
No.
No.
Next question. No, they don't. They don't. I mean, you know deep down you know you're better, but the reality of, I mean, a monograph is slightly different because once you've got the contract, you're normally going to get it published.
Mhm.
It might have to go out to review, but it's not so bad. But with a journal article, I mean, the journal, getting into a journal is dependent upon an editor liking it, and then dependent on 3 people who
Mhm.
are experts, but they may not look at the world the same way as you. So there's still a bit of a lottery to it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting to know as well that you sort of need to be open-minded about that process and sort of flexible where necessary. Um,
Mm.
and like I said, the different stages that come with that. Absolutely.
I think there is a that one of the flexibility things is that you'd rather than just saying, right, I'm writing for this one journal, I'm writing for this journal. If they don't like it, where's it going to go next? If they don't like it, where's it going next? So you actually line up the journals, recognizing that you have to rewrite it to fit each journal's style. But
Yes,
you
absolutely.
actually have a series of ones where it could fit, rather than just saying this is just for this, and if it doesn't go there, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, moving the work around
Mm.
and yeah, not worrying too much, I suppose, about so-called obstacles, just going to the next publishing house, I suppose. Yeah, that's it, it's about again, it's that sort
Mm.
of positivity aspect, isn't it? Sort of being mindful.
I think it's
Um,
bloody
mm,
mindedness rather than
I'm-
positivity.
right, yeah. Yeah, that's no, I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very good. Um, so the next question, actually, and I know we've touched on this slightly. So the use of generative AI in academic contexts is becoming, well, it's not even becoming, it is a hot topic
Mm.
now.
Yeah.
The university currently advises that students exercise caution when using such tools to aid them in their academic writing, so as to avoid plagiarism. So what are your thoughts on the potential of AI being used to fabricate someone's authorial voice in academic writing?
I don't think it's about potential. I'm sure it already is. I
Right,
don't.
yeah.
There's no doubt it is. I mean, I would see that Gen AI is like Wikipedia on steroids,
Mhm.
and it's the ultimate plagiarist in its own right, because it's very bad at giving sources, and when it does, it quite often gets them wrong. I've been writing quite a lot on Gen AI. I mean, Gen AI was a great thing to write on last year. I did a paper with some colleagues, and we've got 300 citations in a year on it because it was on Gen AI. So it's well worth writing on just to get the citation count.
Right.
More importantly, though, with Gen AI, it's there. It does do some amazingly fantastic things. I talked about referencing. I can't remember what the name it was. I was playing with something on Google yesterday, which is a piece of thing where you just put the text in and it summarizes it for you. So I tried it out to see if it worked with 3 of my papers, and it summarized them better than I could. So I was very impressed by that. So it's doing some great things. We've
Mhm.
all been using Gen AI for some time in a very primitive form in spell checks and grammar checks anyway. It's just getting more and more advanced. I think the worry I have is it invariably tends to norm towards certain biases just because of what it learns from. And so
Yes.
it's constraining authorial voice by doing that. It's introducing bias. I think it's also might be recolonizing rather than decolonizing, because if you look at what it's learning from, it's predominantly white, Western, and almost certainly male. So there's all those interesting things that's going to be coming through with it as well. So I think it's very much we as academics and as doctoral students as well, we need to teach others to be constructively critical of what comes back rather than accepting it. And I think it's going to change the entire way of how we teach at universities, from learning facts to actually learning criticality skills. I think that's going to be the most crucial thing, and being able to look at something and say, hang on, that doesn't seem right, and being able to voice why. So I'm not frightened by it. I just think it's going to create some horrendous problems if we're not careful.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer, actually. Like I say, just sort of, I suppose, navigating the use of AI. I mean, well, my limited understanding is that it's quite good as an assistive tool, for small issues, perfecting certain grammar issues, particularly I think for international students, it seems to have certain applications. But like you said, just being mindful of your own authorial voice, and not being sort of taken over, I suppose, by these kind of AI applications.
And the worry for me is you don't know how it's got there. And that is the frightening thing. So, for example, if you asked it to write a paper and analyze some data for you, it will give you the answer, but you wouldn't know how it got to that answer.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of not seeing the origins,
And
right?
so therefore that then reduces the credibility of what's happening. Where's the credibility of what it's done?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Actually, at that point, I should just tell everybody, particularly postgraduate students on the call, just to check the university guidance on Gen AI, if you're not completely sure, and also the guidance is surely to change as well. So please refer yourself to the pages on the intranet there. So we do have a bit of time, and before my closing question there, Mark, I just wondered if you had any further insights on, if you're a postgraduate student and your first attempt at publishing, any sort of hot tips, things you would
I will
recommend?
repeat the piece of advice that was told to me when I started, because I still think it's brilliant advice. If you write it, you'll be able to get it published somewhere. So in other words, don't waste anything.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting off, that's really important. The other thing is, look at where you're writing and do your homework first. So read what the information of the contributors are. And if it says it wants it in American spelling, give it to them in American spelling. If they say you have to write in third person rather than first person, however you feel about it, do what they ask. And also, and just the ultimate one of the journals on the editorial board for is the International Journal of Management Reviews. Now, there is a clue in the title of the journal. Quite a large number of the papers we reject at desk reject level are because they're empirical papers. And it's a review journal. So it helps to look at what the journal actually wants and write and send it to the right place.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I've heard so many times actually that people in communication with a publisher, they don't read all the criteria for submission, and then sort of come a cropper at some point. So that's really interesting.
I will give an example of where that can go wrong. I submitted a paper to Annals of Tourism Research, and it was I thought it was a lovely paper. I was really pleased with it. And it got desk rejected because they said the language was improper for the journal.
Right.
And so I looked at it and I thought, no, it isn't. And I clicked. They must have used a computer to check the language. And basically, we had quite a lot of quotes from participants in it. So it got rejected for the participants' quotes not being in the right language for the journal. So he wrote to them and said, this is why we think it's been rejected. And then it came back, oh, yes, sorry.
Right. Okay. So seeking that sort of clarification on why. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, and it's just nice again for you to impart your experiences there, because I know a lot of people, if they haven't published already, they'll be sort of constantly thinking of what do I need to do in preparation. So that's brilliant. Well, before I open up to the audience, I just want to ask, so in sum, what are your 3 top tips for PGRs on how to be a successful academic writer?
Do it often, write every day, every single day, always write. Even if it's only for 5 minutes, but always write. That's the first tip. The second tip is you don't write, you rewrite.
Mm-hmm.
And the third tip is some days you just will not feel like doing it, so don't. Which kind of fits my first tip, but it's only an odd day, rather.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you. It's just really sort of simple, honest advice. Yeah, that's fantastic. So just before I open up there, just to let you know, in the chat, we've got a few links. So George has kindly put some information there about Gen AI, I can never say it, Gen AI use for PGRs, and also more about what the Academic Writing Month has to offer. I've also dropped a link in the chat there to the Canvas section, which tells you a bit more about what's to come in the In Conversation series. So, Michelle, I don't think there are any questions just yet, so we can give people a moment just if they've got anything to ask. Any questions for Mark today? I think we've had a really interesting session there, really sort of open and honest session about academic writing. Oh, Michelle, you got your hand up.
Can I
Yes,
hop
Michelle.
in? Mark, that was fascinating. And whilst I was here technically in a kind of professional capacity, I have several pages of notes, and I think everything that you've shared has been extremely helpful.
Oh, thank
Although
you.
your very last sentence answered the question I was going to ask you. So I now don't have a question. I was going to say, what do we do on days when we don't feel like writing? But I absolutely got the sense that for you, writing was it'll come if that idea isn't working right now, let's pop that to one side and move on with another idea, and kind of this natural feeling of writing, which I loved. And so, yeah, not a question, but I really enjoyed kind of
Oh,
hearing
thank
your
you.
wisdom.
Me
So
too.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Georgina's got
George.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Mark. Really, really insightful stuff. And hopefully everyone's been able to take some really good tips away. This might be a slightly unfair question to spring on you, but I was wondering, is there a piece of writing that you are most proud of?
Well, yeah, there's different sorts, right? I'm gonna do. Can I pick 3 because it's always nice to do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. The first one I'm really proud of is a textbook, which the university will probably say I should be writing journal articles, but I think I've had more impact with my research methods textbook than I ever have any impact on anything else. It's gone through 9 editions now, which is pretty gobsmacking, and we've got 500,000 sales. So I'm very proud of that. So yeah, and sorry, I'm gonna visual aid number 1. But notice it says master copy at the top because this one's scribbled all over what's going into the 10th edition. So that's the first thing. The second piece, which I'm really proud of, is a paper I wrote for a journal called Field Methods in about 10 years ago. And it was about what happens when you put a questionnaire online rather than doing it paper. And it was just a nice little experiment of comparing what comes back when you send questionnaires out to 2 different groups, one online and one by paper, and everything else is controlled for. And I like it because I think it's my neatest one I've ever written of actually going from literature to research question and going through. So I think it just comes together rather sweet. So I like that. And the third one I'm really proud of because I never thought I'd be able to do it is a few years ago I had a research visit to New Zealand, and I took a week's holiday and rode a motorbike round North Island. And I thought, I wonder if I can write for a motorcycle magazine. So I did. So that's my third piece. I wanted to see if I could do it, and I did.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Really huge variety of things there. And I like your last choice in particular. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Raymond.
Hi, Raymond. Oh, you've gone over to the Raymond. You keep on jumping around my screen. You go from left to right. Most confusing.
So I've known about Mark's work for about 10 years. I'm a postgraduate. I'm in thesis awaiting mode. I've done the courses at the library. I thought I was a great writer when I got a distinction on my master's, and I went on to do the PhD. However, and I'm not having a moan, please, I'm not having a moan. Okay, but writing for academic or thesis is different than writing for publication. Now, I'm doing an alternative thesis, so I agreed early on in my PhD that I'd be trying to get papers published. However, at my first annual review, I was asked, what's my contribution to theory and what's my contribution to knowledge? Now, at the time, I didn't really understand. Like, I felt like a bit of an idiot, to be honest. Because nearly 4 years later, I actually know now what they were asking me. But they don't tell you this, and they don't tell the postgraduate researchers this. So ultimately, we come in as a postgraduate researcher, we have to do 3 mandatory master's courses. One of them is on philosophy. Don't get me wrong, I like Professor Ben, he's great. But if we want our PhD students to get more stuff published, we have to show them how to write academically. If we want them to do longitudinal analysis on secondary data, we have to show them how to do longitudinal analysis. At the moment, our students have to go to Manchester University to do SEM modeling. Okay? We should be looking after our own students. Okay? So for me, I've been on a double journey, both how to write academically for papers and how to write for thesis, and they're different. The biggest kind of paper that I found that helped me was the Lock and Golden Biddle from 1997. They talk about problemization and how you can contribute to sort of incompleteness and inadequate problemization, and they address both theory and research gaps. It's not just about addressing the research gap. And it's just, I've been on a massive journey, and it's changed how I write. It's changed how I frame my writing and how I can explain what contribution I'm making, because ultimately they just want to know, really, what contribution are you making to theory? There's lots of knowledge gaps. Well, what are you making to theory? That's what makes the difference. And I just found that paper it's changed me. I found it about a year ago, and it just changed me. If I had it in early 2 years ago, I would have been much further ahead. I just thought I should share that with people.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond, for that. Actually, somebody just in the chat was just wanting to know what book that is. So I don't know if you could just put that in the chat if you're able there.
Yeah, it's Lock and Golden Biddle. It's a paper. What I do is there's about 4 different papers that I found very useful. So there's a Huff paper from 99 about writing for scholarly publications. There's the Thatcher and Fisher from 2022, and they talk about the nuts and bolts of writing a theory paper. And I found that very useful. There's also the Lock and Golden Biddle, and they talk about incompleteness. Now, there's for Lock and Golden Biddle, they talk about 3 elements for contributing. One, you either use a different framework or a different theory in a different context. 2, you fill a research gap. And then 3, you criticize other people's work. Now, they recommend use 1 and 2, and don't be criticizing people's work. But I just found it very, very useful. And I try and share that. I teach, or I conduct seminars for research methods and methodology. And I've done it for the last 3 years. And it's the first paper I try and share with even the undergrads. And even though when we talk about academic writing, they don't tell you the value of the journal. So they might say, oh yeah, it's important, the journal. But if you don't know that the AGJ, the journal guide and the quality of the journal, and you're trying to fulfill gaps within the journals, you're not getting published.
Yeah.
So
that's brilliant. Yeah.
Come back on Raymond's stuff.
Yep.
Raymond, I think you said some really, really important things there. And I love the fact you're chucking references out to people, because it's really useful to have extra things to read. I'm gonna you've got something which is you talked about one of my pet hates. I'm gonna take presenters thing and come back at you. I hate research gaps, because every time I go to London, I see people saying mind the gap, and I think I can't write a paper on that. It's just, and I think it's better to frame it in terms of puzzles or questions rather than gaps, because that to me makes my head work better. That's personal. And I certainly was doing some work in South Africa earlier on this year, and everybody was talking about research gaps, and I sort of did a little bit of a hissy fit and said, no, we don't do it this way. Try thinking it this way. And people found the idea of a puzzle which they were trying to solve quite good, or a question they're trying to answer. You were then talking about things on writing. I'm going to do a plug now. I've got a YouTube channel called Mark Saunders on Research Methods, which has got quite a lot on it now on writing and how to write, and with examples from journals for how to build arguments and also how to put it together. So that might be some help. And the other thing is, it's about when you were talking about contributions, and there's a lot of ways we can contribute to knowledge. We can contribute to knowledge to actually showing how a theory works in practice. We can build theory, and we can also contribute to practice if we're doing a professional type doctorate. So I think we need to broaden the idea of contribution out. However, I put this is my favorite book ever on writing. It's by Howard Becker, and it's called Writing for Social Scientists. It should be called Rewriting for Social Scientists, but it's a really nice read, and it's the subtitle, which I think is perfect for a lot of the people on the call, is How to Start and Finish Your Thesis, Book or Article. So, and they have got multiple copies of it in the library as well, because I checked. But it's a very, very easy read, but it also gets some good insights. But yeah, Raymond, some really great points there, and I love the idea of being clear on contributions and what sorts of things they were, and theory and practice and all that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond, for your insights there. And just to let you know, George is kindly putting things in the chat there to refer to different links, etc. Marwa. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Marwa.
You demute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, forget about that. Hi, my name is Marwa. I'm a first year PGR in IDD. I have a question. It's the classical question, really. But maybe you can tell us your experience. When do you start writing? When you're like venturing into a new territory and you're just reading and reading and reading.
I never just read. I always read with a pen and a piece of paper.
So when
I make notes. I don't like reading by highlighting, be it electronically or with a highlighter pen.
No, I agree. When do you put it into a draft? Like,
yeah. So I start writing from the very beginning. I make notes, which is writing, and so because otherwise it just goes in through my eyes and misses out my brain completely. So if I'm writing, at least it starts to lock it into the head a bit better.
And when do you say that's it? I've read enough. I'll just put those notes into a draft and I'll rewrite it.
Oh, very good question. I think there's a real temptation to carry on reading forever and ever, because it's a lot easier than having to write, which is why I start writing at the very beginning. And I think you start to realize after a while that you've read most of the key literature, because the ideas that are coming up and the names that keep on being mentioned, the same people time and time again. And that's the easiest way of knowing. There are some lovely bits of software you can use now, like connectedpapers.com, which is an absolute dream. If you find your key paper and just put it into there, it gives you a beautiful spider diagram with all the papers that are related to it, and going forwards as well as backwards. So it's very, very helpful indeed.
Oh, thank you about that.
But yeah, I think that's about it.
It's wonderful. Michelle, I didn't know if you want to pick up some of the questions there in the chat.
Sorry, I will be completely honest and say that my 4-year-old had been running in and out with his pumpkin. So that is entirely my fault for missing that. I apologise. Yes, bless him. It's school holiday, so a bit trickier.
Ian's got a brilliant question in the chat. I love it. Shall I read it out, Michelle? Or do you want you read it out, Michelle?
I did read it, but I was listening at the same time. As a late career academic, I struggle with what I see as impenetrable and pretentious language in my management field. Does this help me get me published, and should I fall in line? So I assume Ian there is speaking, you were saying earlier about if the journal is saying use Americanized spelling, for example,
I know exactly what Ian's talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you're talking about bullshit battles brains, aren't you?
And Latin.
Sorry, and Latin, yeah.
And Latin, who uses ex ante and ex post in day-to-day conversation? We use before and after, don't we?
Yeah, I think we've got two different things going on here at the same time. There are certain terms and terminologies which are common parlance within academic writing. Ex ante isn't one of them, by the way. And once we get to know our own disciplines or sub-disciplines, we know the language that's being used. However, there are a certain number of academics who seem to try and take the most simple thing and say it in the most complicated way. I don't like that. I try not to do it myself, but it does happen quite a lot, and I don't like it. There is certainly increasing numbers of journals who are trying to actually ask for plain language that can be understood, which I think is a very good thing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't use the correct terms. So yeah, it is a problem. I always think people are using language to obscure the fact they don't know what they're talking about. And it seems to happen, to go back to what Raymond was talking about earlier, it seems to happen a great deal when people are talking about philosophies. I'm just doing some work at the moment on philosophical reporting, and one thing you learn very quickly when you start reading about people's philosophical reporting is that they don't know what they're doing.
Well, I'm thinking of a very practical, pragmatic management field where researchers are frustrated about their lack of engagement with practitioners. And as an ex-practitioner, I can understand why.
Yeah. But we can take that one further, Ian, and the biggest problem in management and engagement with practice is the fact that they don't. And the problem is not caused by managers, it's caused by management scholars not going out and doing so and not making what they do intelligible. And I've written on that as well. I think it's so important. I think it's absolutely crucial. We should be going out and explaining our work and working with people so that they can actually see the utility of it rather than just writing esoteric papers which people don't read.
So at least initially, you think it's worth trying to keep my language clear?
I think clear language using the correct terminology is absolutely the right way to go.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Sorry, Raymond, did you want to add something to that?
Sorry for bumping in again here. So Mark is right on the philosophy stuff. I still don't understand. I've already suggested this to both Department, the Management and the Department of Strategic Strategy for us, that the only philosophy stuff the students should be doing, I even say it to the undergrads, is to do the HARP test in the Saunders book, and that'll tell them what philosophical approach they take to research. But that's the first thing I'll say to the students when they come in, to do the HARP test. I had a professor that has never done the HARP test, and I made him do it, and we had a great conversation about it last year. So that was wonderful. But as I said, they make undergraduates do a master's program in philosophy, which it's the same as doing the HARP test, but we spend 8 weeks doing it. I'd rather see an 8-week course for all our PhD students on how to write for publication, to give them a heads up, rather than doing their PhD, finishing the PhD, and then it becomes an afterthought. So to become a better academic, we almost have to accelerate this process of being kind of to write academically and get more papers published. I think the university would benefit much more from that than just simply doing philosophy courses and letting students do it, I'm not having a moan. I promise I'm not having a moan. But I just thought a bit more constructive,
Yeah, thanks for that, Raymond. There, I'm conscious of time here. I just want to communicate Sarah's question there. Mark, Sarah asks, how do you resolve the problem of distraction when you're working?
I try and remove as much of it as possible. So I don't have I do have my mobile phone with me, but I leave it on silent. I've switched off all the pings that come with various alerts on my computer. So those are obvious immediate distractions. I like to work in a place that's completely quiet. I know a lot of people aren't, but then I find coffee shops are quiet because I'm annoyed, even though they're noisy, quiet because I just zone out from all the hubbub in the background. Sometimes a distraction is quite nice. Somebody asking you if you want a cup of tea is really gorgeous. And I think we do I think it's, you know what distracts you, and you can it's a case of being honest enough to actually stop yourself doing it. I did have a doctoral student who couldn't start doing her PhD until she finished cleaning the house.
Right.
Her partner was really, really upset when she finished the PhD, because then they had to do the cleaning as well. You know, so there's different distractions you do with these things.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of those, isn't it? We think of distraction as a negative term, but I suppose it's both the welcome and the unwelcome distractions, the ones that help break up the work, and then the ones that kind of impede the work completely. So,
I mean, I do know, certainly when I'm working now, if I'm working on something which I know is going to be difficult, I will make sure I shut everything off so I can't get distracted by, especially by phone calls and pings on the computer. And if I don't need it, I'll have the internet off so I know nothing's coming in.
yes, yeah, yeah, like you say, limited mobile phone use is a very important one nowadays, because I think it feels like everything's on it. So being sort of mindful of that, absolutely. Well, it's been a really insightful conversation, and thank you, Mark, again for joining us today. And I'm glad to have such a sort of a wealth of attendees there today as well. And thank you for your contributions in the chat and coming off mute. So we've got a few minutes left there, and I think we'll probably wrap it up. Oh, sorry, George's got something to add.
Hi, George.
Oh, clap! Yeah, can we please
thank
give
you,
Mark
George.
a virtual applause? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, much
Okay.
appreciated. So,
Okay, thank you, guys.
thank you very much indeed. And the recording will be made of this session and sent out subsequently. So thank you very much indeed to everyone.
Okay.
And have a good day.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
weekend, folks. Cheers and bye.